So I've been dancing around this topic for the last few days, maybe further, trying to understand what's the right way to act, what's the wrong way, how should we think about how we're meant to function as people, and then most recently talking about heroes and villains and the idea that by and large, they're the same thing. It just depends on perspective, value system, time horizon you're willing to look at. And I talked about how you can come to a conclusion that none of it really matters because it's all so subjective and it's all so messy and unclear, and you can't really tell anything. That why should you even worry about it? It's almost out of your control. But my conclusion was that I don't believe that. I believe that's where the value of these videos and these topics and ultimately this way of thinking, right? I refer to it often as a drogo or thinking better, and pairing that with mental toughness is so important because that's, for lack of a better word, that's the anecdote. That's the path. That's the way you have to follow. But I didn't really articulate why or connect that fully. I started to. I want to do that a little bit more. And the way I've started to think about it is through let's use a political lens, because I think a lot of this comes to that when we think about how societies or people or countries are meant to function. A lot of that comes down to politics and government and how we should organize and be structured. And I'll kind of take a path here to it, so hopefully it works. When you think about the chaos and the uncertainty and the lack of clarity, right? Who's a hero? Who's a villain? How are we meant to function? What values are the right values and all of that? The idea of propaganda, I'll use that term, comes into play. I've also referred to it as like there's a superpower to be able to see that forest from the trees and see how uncertain everything is and how messy it is. And you can use that superpower for evil. And I believe propaganda very much fits into that category, where you can see that nobody will ever really know what's going on. Nobody's ever going to be sure or certain on what's happening. It's very hard to tell who's the hero and who's the villain. So if you use that, if you almost weaponize that through propaganda, you can manipulate and influence people to do lots of things that might not be for the betterment of people, right? So there is that subsect or that section of people or a subset of people that maybe truly have bad intentions or bad actors, right? Hitler, the Nazis fall into that category where they had evil intentions and they used propaganda. They used this dynamic at play to their advantage. And in many ways, we're almost helpless to it because, again, we can't decipher. We can't tell when it's propaganda, when somebody's a hero, when somebody's a villain. If you manipulate that in such a way, and it seems to align with some values that we have, right? German nationalism or whatever you want to use in that example, you can get us to believe lots of different things. So that's dangerous. But there's even a much bigger portion of the population, I would say, which are people that aren't truly evil. They mean to do well. They mean to try and help people. They mean to do things that are for the betterment of the country or society or whatever it might be. But they themselves don't recognize, right? They can't tell if they're a hero or a villain. They can't tell when they're thinking about things the right way because it is so messy and so unclear. And there isn't a clear right or wrong per se, right? And I think what you're trying to achieve, or what at least I believe we're aspiring to achieve, is to bring some clarity to that, to help make it clearer and more obvious to tell, A, if somebody's manipulating us, if somebody is truly a bad actor and they're using propaganda, or B, if somebody means well, but they just don't have the capacity, as I mentioned before, that thinking better, a drogo, as I refer to it, or the mental toughness. If they don't have those characteristics and traits, it significantly decreases the likelihood that they're going to get to a good outcome at the end of it. So that's what you're trying to bring. You're trying to bring clarity for everybody involved. And again, if you keep it in the realm of a country, right, the population of that country and the political figures and the leaders of that country, you want clarity so you can tell who's a hero and who's a villain, again, for lack of a better phrase. And I think that's what you need to try and achieve. And there needs to be some way to assess that, where you can start to identify that and tease it out and see those things. You want to identify in people their ability to, and let's take the two groups, right? Let's start with the bigger group, the more prevalent one. So you have somebody who, and let's just totally make it up. Let's say there's somebody that believes very strongly in socialist views. They believe that's the answer. That's the way to fix the country, or that's the right approach to, economic prosperity or better social climate for everybody involved. We could debate that, right? You could have different views on socialism versus capitalism, and you could debate all that. But in many ways, one of the core, so that's one piece of it, but one of the core things you want to identify is, again, their ability to think with clarity, their ability to be objective, their ability to be logical, and their ability also to have the mental toughness, for lack of a better word, to identify when they might be wrong and to change course and course correct. You want to see those things in those people, because if they're good people who mean to do well, and they happen to believe right now that socialism is the right approach, if they have those skills, if they can think better, if they can think clearly and be objective and identify their blind spots and have the mental toughness to correct when they're wrong, that's in many ways the best you can hope for, because if socialism is not the answer, they will pivot and they will go to something else. What you don't want is somebody who is so certain and so dogmatic that they refuse to change. They're just locked in on it. Again, they mean well, they think they have the right answer, they think it's better for everybody, and maybe they're right, but they should still have that willingness to entertain the idea that they might be wrong. That's what you're trying to test for. And so that's what you're trying to tease out. That's what you want to see. So you want to see evidence in them. You want to see that they can prove out that they have the ability to do that. You want to see historically in their background that A, they've shown their work. They've shown why in this scenario they believe socialism is the right answer. They've shown that they've gone through the rigor. They've looked at capitalism. They've looked at different approaches to it. And here's why they think socialism is right. They want to lay out their assumptions. They want to lay out their beliefs and lay it out very clearly. So that's one piece. The second piece is you'd like to see some history of them, whether it be on that topic of socialism or something else, where they had a really strong view, like they view about socialism in this case, and they went through that rigorous process and came out to a different conclusion, where they showed they had the mental toughness to say, hey, I really thought the answer was this. I thought through it all and I had the right answer, but then new information was brought to me, new analysis was shown, I thought about it from a different perspective, and I realized, hey, I might not be right, and they changed. It's an example. I think you need to go deeper than that, but it's an example of what you're looking for when you're trying to test to show they have that capability. If they can show that, at least at that point you have some confidence. It doesn't ensure they will be great leaders. It doesn't ensure they will lead us in the right direction, but it increases the likelihood that you'll get to a better outcome, right? That's part of what you need. Being a good person, being well-intentioned isn't good enough, right? So even for that person, that in this scenario, that socialist who's looking to do that, you could see them being maybe a little standoffish and saying, I don't need to prove any of that. I know I'm doing this for the right reasons. Okay, if you truly are, you would then not be afraid to prove it out, to show this, to show you have these capabilities, because you would understand that the population, the constituents, the people, they can't tell for sure. They have to take your word for it. And it's too easy. The risk is too great that there could be one of those people in the other groups, one of those bad actors, one of those people using their superpower for evil or using propaganda who would manipulate. They can't tell the difference between those two things. So you should welcome the idea to try and show that, hey, I'm not in that class. That's not where I fit. Let me show it to you, right? Because it makes everybody better. It helps increase the odds for everybody for a better outcome. And then that other group that is trying to act in bad faith, the other group that's trying to use propaganda or manipulate or work towards their own intentions, they clearly would fail that test. They wouldn't be able to do it. They wouldn't show their work. They wouldn't show instances where they changed and pivoted, where it seemed to go against their best interest or what they believed, because that's not what they're out for. Their objective is different. So a lot more I'd like to say on this topic, but I want to end here just for sake of time. But I think there's something to this concept of everything we've been talking about in these videos being used to help bring some of that clarity, so we can start to see, again, for lack of a better phrase, who are the heroes, who are the villains, who's right, who's wrong, because we're never going to know for sure. We just want to increase the odds, increase the likelihood that we get to that better outcome.